Bring yourself into the moment, bring your attention inward. Notice your experience right now in your body and your breath. And of course, we're going to work with the mind, with thoughts, so notice that as well. Allow yourself to rest for a couple of minutes. Sometimes it's helpful to tune into our bodies, notice that we're sitting in a certain way, that we have the comfort of warmth, perhaps we have the feeling of our bodies being supported in the chair or in the room. We can tune into what's happening in terms of a tightness or relaxation in the body. And as we breathe out especially, we can allow ourselves to relax. So notice your forehead and your eyebrows. Let that soften. Notice the flow of breath in your nose, how it feels a bit cooler when the air flows through on the in-breath. Relax your jaw and mouth, the hinges of your jaw, the neck and the throat. And notice the whole back of your body, especially the back of the neck and your shoulders, the large muscles of the upper back. And bring your attention to the chest and the stomach as well. Not really looking to do anything about what we're finding, we're really just noticing what's going on right now. Take a few deeper breaths. Notice how you can feel your breath in the chest and in the stomach area. And let yourself relax on the out breath. And for a moment, notice the thoughts that are coming up in your mind. We generally notice them just behind the forehead. And we can watch and see what the content is of our thoughts. We can notice there's a thought about the meeting, what's going to happen. There might be a thought about something we need to do after, or some unrelated incident from a long time ago. It could be anything showing up in our thoughts. And as you're watching right now, let whatever thought is present just come to a stop. It's very natural for us to have associations, so we have one thought and then it moves into another and then another. Just for right now, notice the end of the thought and allow yourself to rest in the gap before the next thought. At some point, another thought comes in, and then we notice that. So this process of watching thought is very different from being absorbed in thought, as we often are. And when you're ready, open your eyes. The first thing that is helpful for us to know is a little bit about how thought actually works. When I learned meditation, one of the things that they talked about was don't try to fight the nature of your mind. So the nature of your mind is that there's one layer of mind that generates thoughts. Even when we're trying to meditate, we don't try to stop thinking. We're working with a different focus perhaps, or there's a natural process that can happen of thought becoming quieter with more space in between. But that we don't try to fight the nature of the mind, which is that thoughts come up. It's part of the mindfulness practice and part of meditation and learning about that is to learn more about our own habits and our thought patterns. And some of those are universal and some of them are more particular to ourselves. So for instance, if you're thinking about being at the beach, some people will have a specific beach come up. We'll all might have a different image, but we're also probably all going to have a fairly similar response to thinking about being at the beach provided that's been a good experience for us. And if we've had an experience of being at the beach that hasn't been, then we're going to have a different experience. So the content of our thoughts and our associations comes from this pool of memories and experience that we have. That's a good thing to know too, that we don't plan our thoughts, we don't decide what we're going to think. What happens is we have this pool of memories and associations and experiences, and then the thoughts just come in. So we don't control or predict our thoughts. They do have a certain kind of momentum and energy based on our experience, but it's not something that we actually really control. The other thing too is that a thought comes in as words and pictures. So that's good to be that specific. One thing I really like about the Living Inquiries and the way Scott Kilby has developed this work is that it's very specific on what exactly is it that's happening when a thought comes in. Why is it that some thoughts are charged, they have more energy, some thoughts don't, and that just to know that thoughts always come in as words or pictures. With words, with sounds, we can either hear the sounds or we might see them, like if we're looking at them in our mind's eye, like they're on a piece of paper or something. And then with images, we see them. Some images are still pictures and some images are videos, like video clips. But we see images, and images are made up of color and of shapes, and then our minds, our brains make sense of it based on our past experience. Then we add words to it, we know what we understand and interpret what we're seeing. And that whole process of thinking usually shows up behind our forehead. When we're thinking about something and a thought comes up, it doesn't come up in our hands or something, it comes up in the area of the brain behind the forehead. Some thoughts are pretty neutral and they come and go. We might have a thought come up about something just kind of randomly comes into the mind. There's nothing really that we need to do. It doesn't really trigger anything, so it just kind of goes. Those kinds of thoughts don't really bother people for the most part. They're just kind of there and then they go, and it's just some kind of a random occurrence of a thought coming up. And other thoughts have negative or positive energy on them. The way our survival system and nervous system is set up is that we have more of an interest in negative thoughts or things that could be dangerous. So we're more likely to pay attention to those than we are to pay attention to positive thoughts. They have more of a compulsion or kind of a compelling energy for them. Bring up the image of a tree in your mind. And you might actually just be able to look out the window and see one, depending on where you're situated. But however it is, look, when you see the tree, there are probably a few thoughts come up about the tree. There might be kind of neutral thoughts about, oh yeah, it's green, it's got birds in it, whatever it is. There might be relaxing thoughts about it. There might be some kind of anxious thought about it, like what's going to happen to the environment, what's going to happen to the tree. Whatever our response is, that we're going to have other thoughts and images, and then we're going to have a response in our body. There's going to be a certain energy to our response. And then if you think about a beach, we tend to have a visual in our mind, maybe from a beach that we've seen in the past in person or pictures of it. We might have other sensory perceptions like the feeling of the warm sand or the salty water on our feet. So it's just an example here of how it is that our associations and our experience tie into thought. So thoughts just don't kind of come out of nowhere. There's always an association or some kind of visual and sensory component to them. One of the things that Scott talks about in the Living Inquiries is how we can shift our perspective from being absorbed in thought to stepping back and watching thought. There's nothing wrong with us because we're normally absorbed in thought. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. But we can also take that step back. So it's just like if we're looking at an image, if a thought comes up as an image of something that happened when we were a child, for instance, and we're looking at it as though we're looking out of our own eyes, the image feels a lot more like it's happening right now. And when we take a step back and we look to see, okay, I can see myself in that picture, in the room with the other people, whatever it is, then we become more aware that we have a different perspective on it. We have the ability to see that it's an image. It doesn't feel so kind of real, like it's happening right now. And there's a similar thing that we can do with thoughts. So we notice words and pictures, and we can take that step back and just kind of rest and notice that these are coming up. And we did that a little bit at the beginning there. And then let them die down, let them just kind of disappear, and then see what that's like. Just notice the fact that you're aware of these thoughts that are coming up. and then they stop for a moment. Another really good, strong point that Scott makes is that we're used to thinking about how we feel. If we say, well, I feel sad right now, the direct experience of sadness might be some kind of sensation or energy in our body. And then if I was to say, how do you feel? You might say, well, I feel sad. Or you might say, I feel a bit bruised in my heart center. There's a feeling of some kind of energy in the back of my throat. I think I'm going to cry. It feels like I'm going to cry. So there's different ways, different angles that we could look at this. So it's interesting to notice that there's more than thinking about how we feel. There's the direct experience of how we feel as well. And when it comes to all of our emotions, but negative emotions in particular, it can seem kind of threatening. It can seem kind of charged, like it's not quite comfortable to go into those thoughts if there's some kind of a feeling of threat on them. A big part of what we're working with here is that there's a system of thinking and thought, and this is how it works for human beings. And we have these brains, we have the body, we have the limbic system. We have a culture that really encourages thinking about feeling and thinking about experience to the point that oftentimes we don't even directly experience. And then when we have over-identification with that thought layer, that it causes more compulsion in our thoughts. So that's another experience that we could have too of seeing how that might be working. This is probably pretty familiar with everyone who's experienced the living inquiries. The velcro effect, what Scott calls the velcro effect, is the fact that thoughts are charged with sensation or energy in our bodies. And also something that I've really noticed working with trauma and with myself and other people who've been traumatized is that any kind of intense sensation can feel like it's too much. And we often have this pulling back or trying to control or numb the edges a bit of our experience so that it feels safe enough for us to pay attention. Most of us have never really experienced the energy in our body and being able to go into it in a kind of a confident way that we can actually pay attention to what's happening in our bodies and we can be present with it without it being dangerous to us. And that's one of the big benefits of working, especially with a facilitator, where we're developing that capacity to be present with our experience, even if it's painful and even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, because that's how we undo the velcro effect. So the velcro effect is when energy is charged by a feeling of not being safe, a feeling of attachment, or a lot of the velcro effect has to do with the core deficiency stories too, that as we're developing and growing, we often will develop core beliefs around I'm not lovable or I'm unworthy, or some of those things that can really follow us all the way through our lives. Noticing the energy and being present with the words and with the images that are coming up, which is really the memory, and then also with the sensation and feeling in our body. When that releases, we don't experience the same kind of compulsion around it. So that makes quite a difference in how much freedom that we experience. So when we see these words and pictures and then they naturally dissolve and we feel the energy, that's when we start to heal from this compulsion that we might have in the mind. And the other thing is that it's natural for us to have some things that are more charged than other things. Some of that depends on our experiences when we were younger. I just mentioned the beach. If you'd have a negative experience at the beach or a feeling of being alone or excluded or something like that, your beach memories aren't going to give you that kind of relaxed, I'm having fun kind of a vibe. It's going to be more of there's a bit of uncomfortableness or even something stronger. So this is just how it works. This is how all of us work. We're all in human bodies. We all have a nervous system and we all have associations and this pool of memories that we have that come up as thought. Again, a little bit more detail on how this works in our bodies, that when we're working with the living inquiries, and we'll do a little practice in a minute of that, that we notice what comes up in our body as energy. There are words and images that are attached to that are velcroed to whatever the sensation is. And then as we see them, then that's how they release. Most of us are very caught up from the neck up. We really pay attention to what's happening in our thoughts and not so much attention in our bodies. And once we get to inhabit our bodies through however we do it, there could be yoga or breathing, relaxations, meditation, walking outdoors while you're paying attention in your body, just tuning in. We have a different relationship. Thought doesn't become the only thing that we're noticing then. Thought becomes one of the things that we're observing, and we tend to have a stronger mind in the capacity of not being carried away by thoughts so much. So let's do just a brief practice right now with that, just a couple of minutes. So notice, bring your attention in. We've had quite a few words in the space just now. And so notice what it is that's happening in your mind right now, in your thought stream right now. And notice that you're, right now at least, pulling back from that you're paying attention, you're noticing what's happening in your thoughts. And notice what feels like energy or sensation or response in your body. And you could pull up an image of a tree or the beach if you want, or just whatever else is coming into your mind. Maybe there's an energy or sensation that you can feel in your throat or your stomach, the back of the neck. So if you're looking at a thought, words or pictures, notice if there's any sensation that's either shown up in the body or gotten stronger or become kind of a bit more wanting your attention. If you're working with an energy, just sit with the energy and notice if any thoughts arrive. And if you've gotten lost in a train of thought, if you've noticed that that's happened, that's fine too. That happens. Just bring yourself back. Look at these words and pictures that come up, and then let them just kind of fade. Come back to the energy in your body. Notice your breath. Notice that your thought and your responses to thought are a process that we can watch and observe. We can experience them as well, and we can also notice our experience with thought and energy. Open your eyes. There's this thoughts that can pull us into a storm of fear and anxiety. And oftentimes our core deficiency beliefs underlie that, and those are just beliefs that are formed through our experience and through our interpretations of experience. So oftentimes they started in childhood when perhaps we weren't being cared for, or maybe we were being hurt or abused, and we turned that inward and developed these beliefs. Whenever we feel fear or anxiety, it's natural and functional as well to react with, well, what if this happens or what if that happens? But what's not functional about it is if it gets to the point where it's not even kind of reasonable. So when we have a what if, kind of a catastrophic thinking, some of it's fairly low level. It's like, well, what if I run into that person and I'm going to feel bad and maybe I'll start crying and then we kind of get into, well, how am I going to deal with that? And it could be what ifs around bigger things that could happen too. A lot of us this week have experienced fear around what might happen with a Donald Trump presidency, to the environment and different things. It can be many, many levels on which this happens. Those kinds of things that really generate a lot of energy in our body and a lot of fear aren't actually helpful at all. And it's very helpful to notice when those things are happening and to pull ourselves back somehow and to just go, okay, I recognize that there's some fear here, there's anxiety here. I'm trying to soothe myself actually, and to trying to comfort myself by controlling the situation. Well, if this happens, this is what I'll do. And if this happens, that's what I'll do. And, to a very kind of short term, that can be helpful. If I run into that person and I freak out, I'm going to get in my car and go. But then if we start going, well, what if this is said, and if we get into too far into the loop, it's actually not helpful at all. So the inquiries are one way that we can really notice what's going on in those and really attend to them. And it can be helpful in a supported situation where we can see the thought and feel the energy of it and have it dissolve. So it's not like we never need to look at these situations. It can be very helpful to do that. And if we're going off into this spinning around of well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this, that's actually not helpful. And that it can create a lot of fear in the mind that just kind of builds on itself. So when we notice that that's happening, then it's good to step back and support ourselves some way so that we can stop that process from just spiraling out of control. We can support ourselves through inquiry, breathing, all kinds of different ways, talking with someone, going outside for a walk. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do that. And that emergency self-care video that I posted on Wednesday morning, where we shake it out and different things, those are helpful to do too. When our thoughts are getting really overwhelming and really compulsive, there's things that we can do about that. We don't actually have to just let it kind of go on. And the other thing about thoughts is that it often really takes over the whole stage. We don't really feel anything because we're just always so absorbed in the thoughts. And there might be lots going on in our energy in our body, but we're not really attending to it. We're just kind of caught in that cycle of thinking, and that's a pattern that's not helpful, and that we can actually do something about too. We can pull back from that edge through some of the practices that we do.